Hi, I'm Sen, and today I'm going to be talking about love. All of it. Like romantic, familial, whether it's chosen or not, platonic, because that's really important too. And even if you think you don't have friends, you have pets or plants or something else that you care about and that cares about you back. So let's get into it. Let's start off with the idea of true love and all of the problematic ideals that society imposes upon us as human beings living in a society. I believe in true love as the idea of a commitment, but when you start to put it in the sense of soulmates and that two people are perfectly aligned with each other based on like horoscopes and shit, yeah, no, that a large component of love really is just getting to know a person and committing to them for maybe the rest of your life. This is similar to the idea of love at first sight as well, because let's be real, like that's just physical attraction, and out of the hundreds of people you've ever been somewhat physically attracted to at first glance, this just happens to be the person that you actually pursued some kind of relationship with, and so it's just confirmation bias in a sense that out of all these people you found attractive, you did end up dating this one person and truly liking them for more than just what they look like. And so you kind of think in your head that this idea of love at first sight must be true. Japanese culture actually has a similar take on this idea of love at first sight, where it's not really like you fall in love with them as soon as you see them, but rather that as soon as you lay your eyes upon this person, you get this kind of premonition sense that you are going to one day fall in love with them. And I think that's a little bit more accurate and true to how love at first sight really works. My friend actually sent me a pretty good question related to this topic. Do you believe love at first sight is real, or does society try to push people into thinking that they found their soulmate based solely on looks? And this is a really valid point, of course, that society raises all of these ideas in like the media and all the rom-com movies and TV shows that we watch, trying to push us into believing that we need to feel a certain way towards another human being, otherwise our life isn't complete. And so I think it is largely due to this concept that we need to fall in love or else we're not whole, which is a complete lie, that we need to experience romantic love at least once in our lives. Next, let's talk about the topic, or rather the idea that nobody will love you unless you love yourself first. I completely understand where this is coming from because self-love is important and we should all be trying to, make steps towards loving ourselves, whatever that may mean. But at the same time, people will love you whether you love yourself or not. I understand family isn't a great example for many people, but for me it holds true that even if my parents don't give me love in the form that I understand that they're still doing their best to try to care for me and show it to me in the ways that they know how. This is a pretty important distinction to make because as a person who's not always completely comfortable with myself, and I assume that's most of the human population, there are times when I just truly hate myself. Everything about my physical appearance down to my core values or lack thereof, and my whole being super deep into self-analysis but then hating myself for getting too deep into self-analysis and then falling into spirals. I just hate myself sometimes. But my friends will be there even in those darkest of times, and that's really important because I know they care, and even when I don't understand why they care and I believe that I don't deserve to be loved, I know that other people will. It's just a constant, and it's going to happen regardless of how I feel of myself, that other people will still treat me like I'm worth something. So in conclusion, you don't need to love yourself just yet to be loved, but you need to be willing to put in the effort, And you kind of need to be wanting to work towards a place of eventual self-love. Now let's talk about relationships. When I was younger, I jumped into a relationship because in my mind there was this kind of checklist, not an explicit one obviously, like a subconscious list of things that I needed to check off in order to be considered successful or worthy of anything. The idea that I needed to have a lot of friends and get good grades and be really good at all my extracurriculars. I didn't fulfill any of those. So next on the list was procuring a relationship. And at the slightest chance of one, I just dived right in. I was super insecure, and I think I just got lucky that I wasn't taken advantage of either physically or emotionally. Because when you're that insecure, anything that goes wrong, you will ultimately blame on yourself. In that mental state, I would have fallen into like a really deep pit of self-hatred. And I think this mainly did happen because there is so much pressure to be in a relationship. Like, one of my friends asked me something along the lines of, there's this guy who keeps coming over to my house and I don't know if I should like go for it. And I was just like, are you even ready for one right now? Like, are you actively seeking to be in a relationship? And she was like, no, I'm not ready. And I was like, then don't do it. Relationships are the kind of thing that people do just to do, because often they feel like they need to and they want something cool to post on social media. And I don't blame those people, because honestly I am one of them, but I just hate the feeling that I need to be part of a relationship in order to be considered cooler. I'm making this a lot deeper than it really needs to be, but just don't jump into something if you're not ready for it. Okay, kids? Let's move on. Another question that a friend raised was, do middle school relationships count? And this is interesting because I personally do not think they do. At least mine didn't. I don't want them to count because they were cringy as all hell. But I think in that exact sense, they do count because they teach you what you're looking for and what you're most definitely not comfortable with. So my instinctual response is that no, they do not count. But after some careful contemplation, I'm like, they do kind of teach you a lot about yourself and what kind of person you are in a relationship. But that's something that a high school relationship could do as well, I'm realizing. But yeah, final line, middle school relationships count. The next question, why/how do some people stop loving? Like, what stops people from developing crushes anymore or falling out of love in a relationship? The phenomenon of falling in love or like falling out of love is kind of similar to that. Like, not in a specific relationship where you might fall out of love with a specific person, but you just fall out of love with the idea of love overall. That when you discover something else in your life that's truly just worth diverting all of your time and energy and passion into, you don't need this concept of love as such a strong presence in your life. So you don't feel the need to go on like dates every week anymore. When you find something else in your life that you truly love, you don't need the idea of love to keep you preoccupied anymore. Another question on the topic of relationships. Do you know you've fallen in love before you fall out of love? I don't really understand what this means. I tried to clarify with you, but I'm really sorry if I misanswer your question. Misunderstand. I think you're basically asking, because if you fall out of love with someone, then you pretty clearly know that you did fall in love in the first place. I think if you truly are in love, you would feel it. To answer the question, love is a feeling, and if you feel it in the moment, then you know you are in love. There is no need to further classify it, but I think you can also feel it in the moment when you just look across the room and your friend is sitting there on the couch and you're like, I'm very glad to have you in my life. Because that feeling doesn't need to be further analyzed. It doesn't need to have a deeper meaning of any sort. If you feel love for them, that is love. So the answer is yes. Let's move on to the idea of heterosexual relationships. Yay! I, for some reason, have this ideal in my mind of a domestic life, which entails waking up to somebody else cooking breakfast and making coffee for me, even though I do not drink coffee. But you know those like fanfic writers or fan art artists who portray rough, angry, dark, leather-wearing characters in like a really soft, cuddly relationship? Yeah, I feel like I am one of those rough characters and I need to be taken care of like that. But then I told my boyfriend and he was like, if it's a domestic relationship, aren't you the one making coffee? And I was like, that's a valid point. But this topic in general, like, is it okay for me to want to be taken care of? Is it okay for a dude to want to be the provider and to feel bad if his girlfriend makes more money than him? I don't know, because the initial reaction is, the typical feminist ideology that as long as you have a choice, then you are making the choice that is right for you, and that's what feminism is. Like, you can be a housewife if you want, as long as you had the opportunity and your husband allows you to pursue other jobs and means of employment. If you want to do this, then good for you. That's feminism. But at the same time, like, I want to be taken care of, but at the same time, I also want to be a strong, independent woman. And that's hard. It's hard to reconcile the two. I also want to go off script a little bit for a second, because, like, we all know romance is pretty heteronormative, but it's also, like, the concept of romance in and of itself denies the existence of ace and aro people. Like, the whole idea of being aromantic grinds against the gears that society runs on, telling us that we need to fall in love. We tell people that they need to fall in love in order to be fulfilled to, the fullest. You can have fun while being sober, and you can live your life without ever falling in love. So here's some food for thought, or like random questions that I've compiled from friends that I honestly don't know how to answer because I struggle with these myself. But first off, what are the boundaries to love? How do you know if something is true love, or if it's you being ultra clingy, or if it's friendship versus idolizing someone? And like I said, I find this really hard to deal with myself because obviously I know nobody is perfect, but there's a difference between knowing something and like feeling it deep in your heart and soul and understanding it. Because for sure, I know nobody's perfect, but then I see some of my classmates or friends and I'm like, sweetie. And I think part of the solution is really just enforcing that understanding. Like, every single time your brain says, I wish I could be them, their life seems so great, you tell yourself, no, that's not how it works. And you kind of just reinforce it slowly within yourself, if that makes sense. Or, on the other hand, you kind of have to keep mental track of whether you're the one who's constantly initiating conversations and trying to ask people to hang out, and they're the ones who just say, okay, sounds good, and they meet you, but they don't seem super invested in whatever activity you have planned out. Or if they just flake all the time, that's like a pretty telltale sign that you're putting in most of the effort, and you should probably get out and find people who deserve your love and time. Next question, what causes people to develop crushes? If I knew Jackie, I wouldn't have fallen for so many skinny, tired boys in middle school. Let me just say that. Sometimes it's just, you just see a person and they're pretty and you like them. Or especially if they're super confident and they carry themselves a certain way. I honestly do not know if I am ever just attracted to someone, or I want to be them, or I want to date them. And it's hard because I think a lot of the times what I see in people is just their innate, like, self-confidence. Like, I can't even ask a waiter for ketchup. And these people are out here, like, applying for internships at the White House. And that's something, like, I aspire to be on the level of. Let's talk relationship advice. I am clearly not an expert. Just have that flash on the bottom of the screen there. So my main 3 rules. 1, safety, trust, respect. Everyone says that the main piece of advice is communication, which, like, we'll touch on because it's important. But also, like, you need to be physically and emotionally safe in a relationship before you can proceed. And clearly this seems pretty simple, but you would be amazed at how many of my friends fall for dudes who don't even treat them like normal human beings. And it starts with red flags. I spent a lot of my, I spent a lot of my, like, formative young adult years on the site that is tumblr.com. And while I wouldn't recommend, like, the vast majority of it to young teens, I got a lot of information about, like, relationship red flags from there. Like, if they constantly take your words and twist them to make it seem like you said something you didn't. If they make you feel like everything they do for you is a favor. Those are red flags. this color right here. And that means you're probably not on the best grounds for any type of relationship. And finally, mutual respect. And again, there's kind of a fine line between whether you idolize someone and whether you just respect them. But obviously, it's pretty important that you respect their beliefs and their opinions and their behavior and the decisions they choose to make in other aspects of your life that aren't just the relationship. Which is probably why it's easier to date someone who's like the same religion or the same, I don't want to say political affiliation, because you don't need to be a Democrat to know that all lives are human lives. But I think you get the sense that if you don't respect someone and accept that their beliefs are their beliefs and that they are worthy of consideration, that's not the best grounds for a relationship either. The second tip is, of course, on the topic of communication. But as a speech and debate kid, let me just say, there is a big difference between knowing what to say and knowing how to say it. Telling a friend, hey, you need to go on a diet, versus, hey, there's this new diet plan I've been wanting to try out. Do you want to, like, get on it together? Because I want to do it with a friend, and honestly, you're the person I feel most comfortable being vulnerable with. Because those are two entirely different things, right? And this applies to the context of relationships as well, because you kind of need to understand how your partner will perceive a certain thing that you say, because your intent isn't always going to line up with its impact. In this regard, you might want to check out that love languages quiz that's online somewhere in the depths of the internet, because it's actually pretty useful for me figuring out what form of love I best accept as my own. Words of affirmation is my main love language, because love languages truly just depend on the person. Like for me, physical touch isn't a big one at all. It's like lowest on my scale, but it's a big thing for some people. And you just kind of have to respect that and get to know your partner's love language and then treat them accordingly. That's all I'm saying. And the third piece of advice is be willing to accept criticism. Because communication involves listening as well as talking, and if you're constantly tied up with being right, you're not going to be willing to hear advice that is actually useful, let alone actively listen to what they're saying and then kind of shift changes in your everyday life and in your mindset. Similar to how I'm very sensitive to positive words, I'm also very sensitive to negative words. And so whenever people try to criticize me or something I've said or something I've done, often rightfully so, I just find it really difficult to not be like, I want to take this time now to wish you all the best of luck in your future endeavors, whether romantic or not. I want to say that you will find love and be cheesy and shit, but the truth is some of you won't. And that's okay too. If nobody is willing to say that they love you, I will. Love you guys.
I'll see you soon.
Romantinormativity. Furry artists. So I have this ideal. Ah! Oh my frick. And you can fall in love without ever falling in love. Just